Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my top 20 new details from the Republic City RPG book. So this is obviously the first proper expansion book for the Avatar Legends RPG. Specifically, this is the Republic City setting toolkit. So I did a top 30 details from the core book as well as the Wan Shi Tong Adventure Guide, and so I decided I'll do a top 20 here for this specific Republic City book. Do keep in mind, as far as we're aware, there is going to be another one of these books coming out that will be focused on the spirit world, and I'll do something similar when that one actually comes out. So just before we get into this, I do want to mention that I do have YouTube channel membership enabled on the channel. So if you want to help support the channel so I can make more videos like this, you can support at two different tiers if you are interested. There's the lower level light spirit tier and the higher level avatar tier. Both tiers will get you loyalty badges and custom emojis for use in the comments and chat. And then at the higher tier, the avatar tier, you will get access to various channel member exclusive videos that are videos I don't usually kind of put up like publicly on the channel, such as other video game videos. Sometimes I'll review just something that maybe isn't in line with what I typically do on the channel. There's some extras there, again not required, but if you help to support the channel it really does help out. So moving on to some final notes before we jump into the top 20. Like last time, there's no real order to the list. It is, for the most part, a selection of 20 interesting details from the book that I felt were among the most interesting. There's maybe some of the most interesting stuff towards the top, but I did my best to kind of have a blend of interesting stuff throughout the video. Obviously in the comments, feel free to mention other stuff from your own reading of the book that maybe I didn't get around to covering here, because there's quite a lot of information in this book. And then finally, if you do want a more in-depth discussion on this book, I have a very long video on the channel from when the book first came out, where I cover the book in full. That video is linked in the description. It's like 3 hours long. I go through everything on this book because, like I said, it's quite dense. But anyway, let's jump in here with number 20. So number 20, like in the previous one, we're going to start off with just the new art that is in the book. Most of the book is not about new art. It's mostly about the text in the kind of setting section in the book. But there are some pieces of new art, like the cover for the book, the legend NPCs all get really nice kind of fancy pieces of art. There are some new kind of, example characters in the playbooks, and there's also some very nice chapter start art. So let's just go through some of that here. So you can see here is Lin's legend NPC. There is Zhu Li. Here is Mako, who finally gets a legend NPC. Same goes for his brother Bolin. We also have General Iroh, who we'll have some very interesting information on later on in the video. And then two of the three playbook characters are the Adrift, very nice Probender design there, and this kind of Air Nomad, new Air Nation character here, the Outcast. And then some examples of some of the chapter start arts, which are really, really nice. We have this lovely piece of art of Korra, this really nice Mako here, which very much relates to the adventure that is part of this book. And we also have, of course, Republic City, so we have to have one for the President Zhu Li Moon, of course. So that is 20, just to highlight that there are some pieces of art, but again, visually, that is not the focus of the RPG books. 19. The book goes in depth on the 10 districts of Republic City. So this is where the focus is. While we don't get a map of Republic City, we get this breakdown that Republic City is ultimately split up into these 10 districts. Central District, Downtown, UA Bay, Old Cranefish Town, Harmony Park, Roku Plaza, the Spirit Wilds, Green Meadows, Dragon Flatsboro, the Underground, and that they are the 10 districts. You can see on the side there's a brief description of these. Some of these you will be familiar with because we focused on it quite heavily in Korra. Other areas we actually didn't really explore that much. So the likes of, Central District, Downtown, UA Bay, we're actually pretty familiar with. Similarly, the Spirit Wilds, a little bit of Dragon Flatsboro, similarly the Underground. But the likes of, say, Roku Plaza, Green Meadows, maybe even aspects of Harmony Park, we haven't actually covered all that much ever. So it's just to highlight that at its core, this is what the book goes into. There's a section for a couple of pages on each of these 10 districts where we get explanations on key characters, key locations in each of these districts, and just covering what role it plays within the city. So, Central District, politics. Downtown is where you have your finance, technology stuff. A lot of the companies are there. UA Bay is where the Probending arena is, but also Air Temple Island, and there's also a United Forces base. Old Cranefish Town is like the history of Republic City. It grew up from Cranefish Town. So here's sort of what remains of like the origins of Republic City. Harmony Park is your kind of entertainment fashion district. This is where a lot of the stuff about like, say, movers is really a big thing in this kind of area. Roku Plaza is more of your education area with the university and the library being the main areas. Spirit Wilds, of course, we know exactly what that is. Green Meadows is the industrial district with a lot of factories, and it's mostly about kind of the workers. The Dragon Flatsboro, of course, is what a lot of the triads fight over, but it's also one of the poorer areas of the city, and it's interesting what they get into about that. And then the Underground, we've seen bits and pieces of it, but they really connect the idea of the Badger Moles at the end of book 4, turn these into kind of something a little bit different and have evolved it into being a kind of much bigger thing than maybe it was before. That's the core of what the book is about. It's not about like tons of new information on the characters that we know about. There's a few bits and pieces as we'll get into. It's mostly world building on these are details about the city you didn't know before. So we'll cover some of that as we go through. But next up we have 18, and that is Turf Wars in the Dragon Flatsboro district. So we have the Creeping Crystal Triad versus the Terra Triad versus the Agni Kai Triad. So we get an interesting description as one of the kind of plot hooks for Dragon Flats, that being that right now, the kind of main triad conflict in this area is the Creeping Crystals against the Terra Triad. So two Earthbender-focused triads. Interestingly, we do actually learn a little bit of history that initially, in the past, we know, of course, the Terra Triad was a really big thing. And the Creeping Crystals was actually sort of like just a smaller kind of triad that kind of in a way spun off from it, hence why they're both Earth-focused. But now, because of Jargala, the Creeping Crystals are actually the more kind of powerful triad, as the Terra Triad are on the rise once again. They have a new leader, and there's a bit of a conflict here between Jargala and Steely Ning, the leader of the Terra Triads. But what the Agni Kais are doing, kind of sneaking around in the background, is hoping that the two Earth-focused triads take each other out. They'll get the advantage because there is a bit of a fight over this territory of controlling Dragon Flats. So, just some interesting stuff and world building about this is going on in an area of the city that we don't know about too much. But we will move on. So 17, we have details on Bolin's role as Zhu Li's presidential aide. We find out that he is like a personal secretary, but also probably mainly a press secretary. He's really good with the media. He is helping how she is seen by the media. And so we get a bit of that here. Now, this is stuff from the comics that we didn't really get explored too much. We knew that this was Bolin's position, but we were never told about what it's really about. So you find out here, he volunteered to be a presidential aide, but it is a role that stresses him out. Press coverage has grown far more favorable, and objects thrown at the president have declined by 56% compared to Ryko's administration. But with the character that Bolin is, he struggles with the idea that in politics it's going to be impossible to get everyone to like you, when usually he is liked by pretty much everyone. And so it's a bit of a tough situation here where he's clearly like good at this and he's really helpful to Zhu Li because he is such a people person. He's so charismatic, and in a way he could be super important to the city if he kind of goes on to take up sort of a more focused kind of public facing role. And then you'll also see a mention here of the mayor of Republic City, which we'll get into in more detail later on. But there's some conflict between President Moon and the mayor, and Bolin is the one who actually wants to try and kind of, you know, put them more together on topics to really advance things in the city. So just some nice details that we didn't know about before, but we'll move on. Number 16, the Whale Dolphin Dining Hall, where the workers and their families from the various Green Meadows factories eat. So Green Meadows, like I said, isn't really something we touch on too much in the series, but what's so interesting about it is that it's a very worker focused, it's a very factory focused area. And just, I thought this was a super interesting detail. They just go into detail on how are these people all fed, rather than just establishing that, oh, there's a bunch of restaurants in the area. They actually cover the idea that most of the workers don't like to go to those restaurants. The specifically set up dining hall to feed the workers is really well run. The people like it, and the fact that, you know, they let the workers' families eat there as well makes for this kind of surprisingly well run kind of system. But again, the whole dynamic of Green Meadows is that we're talking about the idea of, are the factory workers going to unionize to get better rights? And, you know, some of the high ups kind of want to shut that down. And it's just a very interesting kind of thing. And it just speaks to the idea of like, oh yeah, like this factory stuff, the Republic City is going through growth quite heavily. This is actually a quite clever solution to kind of happily feeding everyone who works there. So it's just an interesting little one there. Number 15. The first steps towards a probending that includes airbending, tentatively called Nomadic Probending. So this is quite an interesting one here, where we've been waiting for this for a while. In the initial RPG content, we got a character who was noted as being interested in probending despite being an airbender, but this is where we go a lot more heavily into the details on it. So it's about this character, Dalise, who is an airbender, and she is the focus behind really wanting airbending to come into probending. So we learned that the idea that what's actually happening here is that she's proposing this idea of introducing a fourth player into probending, not remaining 3, but you can have an airbender instead of one of the other 2, but full on 4 versus 4. So they're calling it Nomadic Probending, and people really like the idea of this. And so what's happening here is they're doing an exhibition match between the Buzzard Wasps and the Fire Ferrets, where Dalise is going to team up with the Buzzard Wasps as their airbender, and they don't actually clarify who's going to join the Fire Ferrets, because of course the Fire Ferrets aren't together really as a team anymore, but it seems like Mako, Bolin and Korra are going to rejoin together, but with who? Like, is Jinora going to join in? Tenzin, Milo, Iki, someone else? It seems like a really interesting idea. Now, they cover the idea, as you can see there. It probably won't be picked up and become a professional league soon, just because there is still a relatively low number of airbenders. We're still sort of dealing with the impact of, like, how far spread are they across the world? How many are there post-harmonic convergence? But it seems like it is a step in the right direction that as the generations go on, this is clearly what probending is going to evolve into, where we have airbending actually involved in it. And you'll also notice in all of this that there's this whole plot about like Dalise, and like she's basically related to one of the founding members of the Terra Triad, and the Terra Triad could like step in to mess this up if they reveal these details about Dalise. So it's not just like kind of one layer of information. There's all this kind of extra stuff in there as well. And just as a fun fact, in the middle there, you'll note that there's just a fun little detail about the United Forces, that they also have a probending team that's called the Iguana Seals, that's kind of based out of their UA Bay base that they have. But we'll move on. Number 14, Tin Town, an underground community that has thrived for years in the tunnels beneath the city. So again, the underground is one of the districts, and we covered that idea here, both the idea that there is this sort of full-on town that we never knew about before, but then also some of the stuff that we saw below with like Gomu living in some of the tunnels. That's more what the Warrens are, and so kind of combined together, the Tin Town plus the Warrens and a few other little areas make up what the underground actually is. It's this kind of area, mostly separate, that like lives by themselves. The police don't really mess with them because they do just kind of exist by themselves. But it is fully organized. It's a full-on community. They have a mayor themselves, and they welcome all outcasts. But one fun detail about this is that they do cover the idea that Tin Town has moved from an initial location to a new one now that the badger moles have opened up a little bit more area underground with more tunnels, because Wu had badger moles dig tunnels underground to escape at the end of book 4. So some fascinating stuff going on here, and then you'll see as you go through all this, the teases of these characters, like the criminal Akemi, who's smuggling food. There's the young badger mole triad who exist in the underground, which we'll get into more later on. So there's a lot of stuff going on here that's really interesting. But we'll move on to number 13, which is that Ryko, former President Ryko, has a radio show called the Ryko Report, and he's causing issues for Zhu Li with his criticism of her and the misinformation that he is spreading. So this is quite an interesting kind of plot hook of just the idea that, yeah, if you read the comics, you'll know that Ryko lost terribly to Zhu Li in the presidential election, and he was just made out to be like a terrible politician who's only out for himself. So of course it makes sense that he would do effectively this radio show, effectively a kind of podcast, causing issues in a way. It's him and his wife doing it together, and you can see here they cover stuff like scandals, high society news, but mostly politics. And they frame it as they're even-handed and fair-minded, but of course we know Ryko, he's not really like that. He's really amplifying negative thoughts directed at Zhu Li, as well as Chief Beifong, and this is becoming a bit of a problem. And so the idea is, should Zhu Li send Bolin onto the Ryko Report to actually give some official statements, counter what's being said here? Or should they just run sort of counter programming that's actually got correct information? I think it's a perfect positioning for Ryko post the comics, post Turf Wars, because if you played the most recent Spider-Man game and you know the whole dynamic of like J. Jonah Jameson has a podcast that you listen to and it's just Spider-Man slander. I think that is the exact idea of the Ryko Report. So very kind of fun little detail there about Ryko. But we go into number 12, which is a kind of big one that uses information both from the RPG as well as one of the adventures that came out in between book releases. So we have the new Equalist leader, Yoshiro, the Iron Dragon, and also the idea more specific to the Republic City that Equalist beliefs are beginning to sort of take root in the Republic City University. So there's some interesting details here. So you'll see here the Yoshiro reveal happened in the RPG starter set, Korra Adventure, The Burning Fuse. So we learned that Yoshiro is the new leader of the Equalists, who've been in quite a bad place basically since book 1, and I suppose the events of the Legend of Korra video game as well, which was kind of the last time they were of any significance. So we see that they're still around. They now have this new leader, and his backstory is very, very interesting. So it says there in the middle, Yoshiro was the only non-bending sibling in a family of firebending prodigies, but proved himself by becoming an expert martial artist. He joined the United Forces only to lose the use of his legs after an accident. He eventually approached Equalist sympathizers and became the subject of an experimental procedure. And so he now has these kind of mechanical prosthetic legs that allow him to walk again, and this has furthered him down this path to taking this more hardline Equalist stance. And he in many ways is kind of just as bad as kind of Amon in terms of what's going on here. But it seems like the Equalists now actually have a true strong leader once again, and it's beginning to have an effect. And that's where Professor Rabten, from obviously the Roku Plaza area, Republic City, comes into play. He's this older professor of philosophy who, you know, has been through a lot, seen the city go up and down, but he has come to this conclusion that the Equalist concerns were real, and he started attending those Equalist revival meetings. He met with Yoshiro and has very much grown to believe in him and the Equalist beliefs, and is now kind of spreading them around in the university, and it's beginning to have an impact, especially combined with the whole idea that the head of the university is kind of taking this approach where, like, even-sided debating, even if there's kind of controversial kind of opinions going around, is something that is needed. So this maybe heavy Equalist stuff probably should be shut down, but it's being allowed to happen, and there's some interesting stuff going on here. But we'll move on to 11, and that is the adventure from the new book here, and that is the Quick and the Quarrelsome. So the details about this one are that basically we have in the underground, the Badger Mole Triad runs underground tunnel races that are extremely popular. So popular that the Harmony Park Corporation steals the idea and tries to make it work on a surface track. The underground races are more popular, so the Harmony Park Corporation wants the police to crack down on the illegal underground races. So this is where Mako asks a group of heroes, the player characters for this adventure, to help the kids that make up the Badger Mole Triad by infiltrating the racing scene and basically making it so that they come out of things okay. Because Mako is, of course, sympathetic to the kids from the Badger Mole Triad because he had that same experience. When he was younger, kind of being forced to become part of a triad to make something of himself, and he doesn't want these kids just getting absolutely destroyed by this corporation just trying to make some money here. There's a bit of a setup here that, like, Lin has been kind of temporarily suspended, and so this is why the police is kind of ultimately going along with, you know, following this corporation, and why Mako's kind of doing things behind the scenes, kind of asking this group of heroes that he knows to kind of step in. So it's probably not the most interesting adventure we've ever had, but it's still quite an interesting one that Mako gets a little bit of focus here. The underground is definitely one of the more interesting areas introduced in the book, and they cover some nice stuff here. Now, number 10. The Mayor of Republic City, Mayor Ailani. So we finally get into this. Now, this is a big reveal. I don't think we never knew before that there was a Republic City mayor, and we just get this dropped in here immediately. And what's so interesting about this is that they cover the idea of this is why you probably never heard about this before. Historically, the position of mayor of Republic City was a cushy job for a smiling face who shook hands and cut ribbons, while the United Republic Council, now the presidency, held the real power. So we see here the details. The daughter of Foggy Swamp immigrants, she grew up adapting traditional waterbending to grow crops in urban environments, so she has some skill here, and she began to run for office because she was quite popular. But we find out that she is this kind of populist mayor who is flip-flopping her opinions a little bit just to gain the support of people so that she can be seen to, in a way, have more of a role in things. And that means that Julie never quite knows what sort of chaotic approach she is going to take to things. And it's just creating issues where, like, there needs to be stability in leadership in the city because of everything that's happened, where, like, we established the whole idea of the city is kind of in a bad state financially because of all the issues and damage that has happened over the course of book 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course, Julie is getting help from some of these businesses to keep the city going. Ailani doesn't like that. But Bolin, of course, can see some value in both of their sides and kind of wishes they could work together. So not a character who's, like, framed, like, super heavily as being, like, just someone who needs to, you know, get out of the way, but who could be kind of brought into the kind of fray as a more important kind of character. So quite interesting. Nice to get another leadership position in Republic City detailed. But we move on to number 9. So we get this interesting description of Pema in Pemas Challenges as the most senior heir acolyte. And I just really like this when I got to this section of like the leaders of UA Bay effectively. And Pema comes up when it comes to Air Temple Island. She is the most senior heir acolyte. And we see that she is proud of the cultural competence and authority she's maintained as a non-bender, especially amongst a family known for having all these talented airbenders. But what's really interesting is what they say next. However, Pema sometimes struggles to keep non-benders relevant and active in the new Air Nation. Acolyte membership has stalled and some members have left, disappointed that they didn't develop airbending. And this is a really cool concept because, of course, the Air Acolytes have been around since some of the early comics set immediately after Book 3 of Avatar. And so, yeah, we've always had this idea of to bring the Air Nation back, we need to keep the philosophies and ideas, the teachings of the people around, even if we don't have that many airbenders. And so Aang started teaching people who weren't initially kind of, part of air nomads to become effectively air nomads. That's why they're the air acolytes. And it would make sense that many of them, when suddenly they find out that people are randomly becoming airbenders, they would all expect, as loyal air acolytes, we should be the ones to develop airbending and become true air nomads. But the idea is, it seems like many of them didn't, and it was just this purely random thing across the place. And so they get frustrated when they see a few of the other air acolytes develop airbending and like no one else really does. And so that's a bit of a problem now that suddenly airbenders are more of a focus of the new Air Nation. How does Pema as a non-bender help the non-benders remain important as part of this? And obviously the whole idea is that air acolytes actually have now this kind of key portion of history within the air nomad history of this section where there wasn't really that many airbenders. So they are important historically, and it's just Pema trying to help them find a way, because she's had this her whole life, her family, she's always been the non-bender among airbenders, and kind of teaching them how she dealt with that now that more people are experiencing the same thing. It's very interesting. But she's also vigilant about, non-bender radicalization after what happened with the Equalists, and now we know the Equalists are on the rise a little bit again. She supports stuff like chi blocking and combat lessons for non-benders, but is very wary about an Amon-esque thing happening again. So super interesting stuff with Pema here, like that she gets some focus. Next, we have 8. Tokuga wants vengeance. He wants to destroy the dragon eel spirit that changed him. So yeah, Tokuga, we've been waiting to see a return for this character who of course was the villain of Turf Wars, the comic. And so we knew that he has of course survived the end of that comic, and so we get some details here that of course he basically fell into the portal more or less at the end of that book, and so he was hanging out in the spirit world. And what he wants, as you can see here more in the middle, he wants vengeance on everyone who put him in this current place. He wants to destroy the dragon eel spirit. He wants to destroy the Air Nation, Korra, and all of her allies. Now, they're not super specific about what exactly is going to happen here, but he is this clever, resourceful character who is now quite skilled and durable because he is spirit morphed. But he obviously, it's noted here, first on his list, he wants to destroy the dragon eel spirit. And I'd love to see how he plans to do that, because we know spirits can't really truly be killed. They always just quote unquote die and change forms. But is there a way to actually make that happen? Will he try to study something to make that happen? Or is he fine in just sort of, forcing a change upon the dragon eel spirit? Either way, I think, Tokuga was interesting enough coming out of Turf Wars where I'd love to see what they do with him next. And this is at least a tease of the future for Tokuga. Next, at number 7, we have Aang helped to found Republic City University, and Zuko funds the Fire Lord Zuko Library. So these are just 2 interesting pieces of information in the Roku Plaza section about Aang and Zuko helping to kind of found these kind of important kind of facilities in a way within Republic City. So Republic City University, we get kind of the backstory effectively of it here. So we find out that you know, some of the oldest buildings kind of basically relate to Cranefish Town. Back then the university was just a dream of an overworked librarian, but thanks to a healthy relationship with Aang, who helped to bring scholars from all over the world to Cranefish Town, the university was founded. The first dean, who came out of retirement from Ba Sing Se University, helped Aang to set up the university, and that's why it's so important. So Aang just playing a key role in helping the university be founded is very cool. And then the Fire Lord Zuko library is initially kind of part of Zuko's attempts, along with the Fire Nation, to sort of make amends for kind of causing the war. So they kind of found and fund the library in the city, and we get the whole idea. It's been built, expanded, renovated, and rebuilt all over the years to expand it as more and more books and knowledge get added. And it is noted, you know, it says Zuko specifically is kind of involved in this. Like, it's become this important thing that the Fire Nation royal family is forever, I suppose, going to be involved with. And it's just a cool little detail here to find out more of what our kind of main characters did to specifically, you know, found and help Republic City form. Number 6, we have this new character, Conti, wants to fly an airship through the spirit portal. This is just a fun random little detail here, but like, it's super interesting. Just like, yeah, like, of course the new Air Nation are going to want to stop this from happening. So this former executive just wants to try and fly an airship into the spirit portal to reenact the grand tour of the Unity. And she wants to just fly the airship through the portal and then basically navigate through the spirit world to the other portals, and in a way come out back into the physical world and do the tour of the physical world via the kind of skips in a way of the spirit portal. It's an interesting concept because you wonder, like, you know, what's going to go on with the technology in the spirit world, and how will the spirits react to seeing a giant piece of technology enter their world. There's some interesting ideas here, but of course they're probably not going to let this happen. But like, in a way, if she sets off that ship and flies into the portal, how can they really stop her without just like taking down the ship with other ships? It's an interesting idea. And then if you don't know the context of the Unity, this is something that was covered in the core book from the Roku era. This is this kind of legendary kind of ship, the Unity, traveling across the world to sort of spread news and information about new technological like advancements effectively. So, but during the time, there was a lot of spying going on, and everyone felt like surely this is the work of spies, just to go around the world and spy on everyone, when actually it was just an honest attempt to spread information around the place. So it's an interesting little detail there. Number 5, we have Cabbage Corp is on the rise, but using bribery, espionage, and sabotage to get stuff done. And this is quite interesting. There's quite a few little sections here on Cabbage Corp, Lao Gan Lan, of course, the head of Cabbage Corp. And then there's also like a plot hook that relates to some of the kind of bad stuff that they're doing here as well. So the main thing with Cabbage Corp we learn here is that we get basically a comparison between a lot of the different companies and like who's in a good position, who's in a bad position. And we find out that Future Industries isn't actually doing so well, but the likes of Cabbage Corp and Coom Enterprises are doing quite well for themselves. Cabbage Corp specifically has a lot of cash because the cabbage merchant was paranoid about threats that natural disasters and the authorities might present. And so he invested in extremely thorough insurance policies that somehow predicted nearly every bad thing to happen to Cabbage Corp the past few years. So he has these crazy insurance policies that no one ever thought would work, but actually worked out well. So they have a lot of money and are ready to invest it in a way that will suddenly take Cabbage Corp from being the company known for being the kind of cheap, low quality option to being they are number one at this specific thing, but they don't necessarily have the vision to know immediately what that next big thing is. And so this is where we get the idea that this is what Lao Gan Lan is doing. He's bribing people, he's engaging in corporate espionage to try and find out what are the other companies working on. And how can we get the edge on them and become number one in this specific situation? And that includes, as you can see here with the final little bit of detail, the vice president of Cabbage Corp, Pakuk. He hires a former Equalist member to go into the underground and basically sabotage it to get the people to clear out. And he wants to turn this underground area into a mech fabrication base. So there's a lot of stuff as we go through the stuff on the corporations about how two of the big things that the company seems to be going in is further down the path of going down the path of mechs and learning more about them, building them, and then Spirit Vine technology, which is basically been banned, but in the background everyone knows it's a kind of lucrative thing and everyone wants to do something with it. That's the other angle on it. So some really interesting stuff if you read the section on all the corporations. Number 4 is the new Air Nation and the Spirit Portal. So again, from the comics, a plot that we get, the Air Nation are given the land around the Spirit Portal to be in control of. And so we find out a little bit of the details surrounding what they actually do, what the status quo is in the city when it comes to the Spirit Portal. And the Air Nation are trying their best to sort of incorporate people into this and teach them what they need to know about the spirits, balance, and guide them around the area and get them used to the spirit, the spirit wilds and vines and stuff like that. It's not the go-to thing, but they will guide some people into the spirit world. And we learn about all these different little areas. Like they have this kind of shrine, kind of information post on like the entrance into the area where they do teach a lot of people the basics about spirituality and stuff like that. And it's becoming a little bit of a go-to location, of course, because there's all these kind of activities beginning to spring up here that are kind of quite interesting. As we get into the section on the meditation tree, you can see here the idea that Jinora is known to lead exercises near the tree each dawn, and people but also spirits are coming to join in these exercises, even if they're not airbenders, because it's this very spiritual activity. And Kai and Milo have had this bet going as to whether the dragon eel spirit will join in these exercises before the end of the year. So the dragon eel spirit, of course, being the one that Korra mainly talks to, who kind of acts on behalf of the spirits that are around these spirit wilds. And she doesn't have a good relationship with him, but they kind of have a feeling he might kind of crack and open up more to humans. But it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens. Again, I would like to see this sort of stuff explored in a future comic, because I think Jinora, we get the idea she's in quite an important leadership position as being one of the most spiritual people in the world, and one of the go-tos for like, go to Jinora to deal with stuff in relation to the spirits. It's very interesting. Number 3, we have Kaya's free clinic in Dragon Flats. So we get some information on Kaya here. We learned that in the Dragon Flats district, she has this free clinic here that is quite an important feature in the district. It is this neutral ground in an area otherwise known for conflict between the different triads. Everyone realizes the significance of having this free clinic for anyone who's in need of medical help. So basically, the conflict is turned off if you go into the clinic, and the idea is no one should ever break this kind of code effectively that they have going on here, because this is so valuable to the area here. Obviously, Dragon Flats is quite a poor area, so it needs something like this, and it makes sense that Kaya, as a healer, would organize something like this. But you see the idea, like it's like understaffed. There is this chipper assistant and second in command, Miko, who's also a waterbender healer. So it's an interesting little detail there. And with the Kaya section of the book, we do cover the idea that she is playing a role in helping the Air Nation to grow. So she's playing a little bit of a leadership position in the Air Nation. And then she also is in charge of her clinic, and she's trying to balance these two things. And this is taking up quite a lot of her time. She's either at the Air Temple or in Dragon Flats helping out. So I think perfect for Kaya and what she's up to these days. I really like the details that we got here. Number 2, the mystery of the underground spirit vine roots. and the disappearance of Yuki. So this is another underground kind of plot point here. The most important thing being the spirit vine roots, and specifically the section right at the end of the first paragraph. Unlike the other vines throughout the city, these seem to have a strange purpose, though no one can put their finger on what that might be. The roots emit a faint glow and reach much deeper than any inhabited feature in the underground. Few have ventured very far into the mess of roots or the tunnel-like pockets within them for fear of getting lost, or worse. No one knows how or why the roots came to be here. Fear of the unknown is enough to keep most everyone out. So they're setting up the idea that these roots work differently than just general spirit vines, and that there's like tunnels within them that lead somewhere, and you can kind of almost get lost in them or something like that. So are they almost implying that these are weird spirit tunnels, or like because they're related to the spirit portal, can they like transport you somewhere? What's going on here? And so this is where Yuki comes in, who is someone who is studying spirit vine energy but has come to now live in the underground, and she's hoping to basically link them up to the power supply, not through the city's power supply, but by just connecting it to the spirit vine stuff, which would make sense if they want to stay away from being connected to the city. And so we get this plot hook then that Yuki has gone missing after basically moving to investigate the spirit vine roots more heavily. Now, it happened like 2 weeks ago. They're trying to figure out what happened. Might they need to bring the Air Nation in? This might bring the authorities in. What's going on here, and what happened to Yuki? Is she just wandering around inside the spirit vine roots, or has she been transported into the spirit world or captured by the vines? It's an interesting idea that they're clearly setting up, that there's a deeper significance to these vines, because I think it's very clear that with spirit vine technology being such an important aspect of the era, this is going to be what really advances the Avatar world as we go into future generations, is a true understanding of spirit vine technology, and the fact that it appears to be almost like this unlimited power supply if you learn to harness it properly, and can obviously lead to crazy technologies happening in the future. So then we have number one here, we have Iroh II General Iroh backstory. So we learn about how he trained as a sailor, as a member of a Northern Water Tribe fleet. So we get this from his legend NPC bio, where we learn all of this stuff we just never knew about him before. And effectively the idea of when he was growing up, he had this kind of decision to make. Does he just go along the path that he's kind of like destined for, and just as this kind of famous person, daughter of the Fire Lord, does he just go down the obvious path and just walk into a Fire Nation officer school and just become a legend from there? But because he has such important people in his kind of family line, Zuko, Iroh, who he's named after, of course, he wanted to do something similar and kind of prove himself in the same way, cooperating with the other nations. So he didn't want to just do Fire Nation training. He felt a draw to the ocean, and so he wanted to learn from the best sailors in the world, so that he wanted to train with Northern Water Tribe sailors. So he tries to get in touch with elite Northern Water Tribe warriors, but they don't think he's good enough. But he ends up securing a position on an infamous fleet of Northern Water Tribe vessels with a reputation for teaching various forms of seafaring espionage. So it's almost this kind of like pirate-esque thing going on. Now, I think if it was directly pirates, they would have just said it, but I'm guessing the idea is that there's probably a former pirate involved in this group somewhere here. And so he learned kind of the true way to be a sailor, but also some of these more kind of pirate-esque tactics. And so he is this character who has the proper like officer training, but then also has the real tricks of the veterans, the people who are super connected to the sea as well. And I think it's just a really cool backstory to highlight that this character, who you could have just summed up as being the famous guy who just had the obvious training you would expect, actually purposefully wanted to do something more and kind of made it happen. You see, it was a struggle for him with Arctic survival and skullduggery, as well as unfamiliar martial arts, but he won esteem from the Northern Water Tribe crewmates for his indefeatable attitude. And this impressed Zuko and Izumi so much that this is how he came to join the United Forces. So we find out that, he became the rank of general, younger than any previous holder of that job, of course. And this is where he learned the likes of lightning bending and strategy and so on. It's really interesting. And right at the end, they tease the idea that, it remains to be seen how Iroh balances his identities as United Forces General and Fire Nation Prince, as well as how the world responds to basically when he does. Because that's the super interesting thing here. He seems very committed to the military. So will he give up his position as Prince, or will he actually go back and become the Fire Lord when maybe that is on the table? And this brings up the idea they don't address if he has a sister, if Izumi has a daughter, and where that character, if they are meant to be viewed as being canon, plays a role. Because if not, then that probably suggests that Iroh is Izumi's only child, and then if Iroh doesn't want to take up the throne, who becomes Fire Lord after Izumi? It's a bit of an interesting question. And then otherwise, if Iroh does have a sister, you can see the throne being passed onto her potentially, and that's a bit of an interesting idea, but we don't know those details. So yeah, that's where I'm going to wrap up the video there. They're my top 20 moments from the Republic City book. Obviously, in the comments, let me know what your favorite moments from the video was, but also if you have other stuff that I didn't mention here. Again, I'll mention I have the really long video where I go through the entire book in detail, where I cover all the stuff about all the different districts and more details on all these things that I brought up here. But otherwise, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.